Hi, Nicholas. Thank you so much for helping my project. Could you say a little bit about yourself?
Okay, so my name is Nicolas Betancourt. Currently a senior in mechanical engineering at the University of Houston. A couple of things that I feel are important about me is I'm Colombian. I came to the US 4 years ago to start my degree. Um, and I'm currently involved in a bunch of fluid mechanics research. That's kind of what pushed me towards the interest in aerospace engineering. And I ended up being a part of AIAA U of H's branch, their project, their rocket Zenith that they just launched the spaceport last week, I'm pretty sure.
I've been learning a little bit about fluid dynamics lately in my new job.
Hmm.
We use like ammonia to transport heat from like, um, you know, what is it? Heat exchangers and base plates out
Hmm.
to like the radiators, and
Right.
it's just kind of interesting. But the fluid dynamics that you're working on, I mean, it's such a broad field. I mean, you got like
Hmm.
about hydraulics and ships moving through water. What sort of I mean, can you talk a little bit more about the fluid dynamic works that you've been working on?
Sure. So I've done two major projects at the university. Both of them are on scholarships. So we have something that's called PERS, and it's the Provost's Undergraduate Research Scholarship, and then one that's called SURF, and it's Summer Undergraduate Research Fellowship. And I've won both this past year. The first project over the spring was about a structure called a wind catcher, and it was just analyzing them and see how viable they were to use in order to replace common air conditioning units because of the whole climate change issue and kind of just to be more environmentally friendly. The one that I'm currently working on is about the stochastic excitation of an elastic membrane and how that interacts with the fluid flowing inside of that membrane. So kind of like a real world application of that would be to understand the flow of the blood on the veins that are on top of your heart and how the beating of your heart affects that flow. That's what I'm currently buying the particles for.
So you're really actually looking at a biological application of fluid dynamics.
This one, yeah, there's multiple applications, but the original paper that we were referencing was about this kind of flow specifically. So that's what we're looking at for now.
And what got you interested in this?
It was the professor that I saw fluid dynamics with. He was the first professor that spoke Spanish that I've had in my career, and we just kind of got to talking, and I got really interested in his class and in fluid dynamics in general, and that just evolved into a more broad understanding of like heat transfer and stuff like that. That's what I'm doing for my internship. So yeah, I kind of just got thrusted into this field, and I'm really happy about it.
I am kind of curious, as a native Spanish speaker and having learned like probably the most basic concepts in Spanish, and
Hmm.
then coming to learn in English, um, do you find yourself translating a lot back and forth, or are you like thinking a lot in English, or how does it work?
So I've learned English since I was around 10 years old. So I mean it's still a little bit of a problem because most of the time I have to think in Spanish and then translate it into what I'm going to say in English. But I don't have much of an issue usually unless I'm tired.
Hmm.
It gets very noticeable when I get tired. Just like I have an accent that starts coming out and I get slower on like responding to people and stuff because you do have to use the processing power to translate inside of your head.
That is interesting. I've tried to learn a little bit of Spanish, like mucho gusto,
Uh-huh.
uh, you know, and a lot of Hindi actually. My wife is Indian, so and what I've come to find out is I only know two languages, English and not English,
Okay.
and that's sometimes when they're like trying to speak in Hindi. If I can't think of the word, but I know the Spanish word, then I will use the Spanish word, even though it's completely different language, to fill in the gap.
Yeah, that's happened to me before too.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Well, uh, let's see, um, you're also a member of the U of H Rocketry Club.
Hmm.
How did you get started in that?
So it all goes back to the fluids research. So throughout your career at the university, you start meeting people in your classes, and there's some of the guys that I'm still I'm still with seeing the classes I started with my freshman year. So we know each other, we know kind of like what we're up to. And I got really into fluids last year around this time. And one of my friends knew about it, and he was in the rocketry team. And they were having issues because they didn't have any validation or any graphs or anything related to fluid dynamics that they could show, because they have to do the report to get to the JSC, like their sponsors and everything, to kind of validate that the rocket is the best it could be. And he knew about it, and he was friends with the chief engineer for space heat rocketry. So he kind of introduced us, and we got to talking about it. I told him a little bit about my projects and what I usually do. And then he asked me if I could help them out, if we could see what doing some CFD on Zenith would look like. And then I started working on it, and it was very promising. I got on the project when it was kind of on the last stages, so we didn't really get that much done, but we did get some good work done. And then afterwards, I got Prith in the team because he also has done some research and some cool stuff, and I needed some help working out major assignments, and it worked out pretty well.
I understand y'all just last week y'all had y'all launched the rocket.
Yep.
And I guess it went up to what, 20,000 feet or something?
22,000 almost, 21,000 and some change. Yeah. It
So,
reached Mach 1.5, if I'm correct.
really?
Yeah.
Wow. Does it actually produce like a sonic boom at?
Yeah. So when I was doing the fluid dynamics analysis, most of the stuff that I was handing in was already at supersonic velocity. It was based on the previous rocket that they shot that was reaching about Mach 1.7. And then we had to kind of do the subsonic velocities, and the transonic was a little bit iffy because the conditions are all transient and everything. We couldn't really have a lot of analysis done on it just because it was really time consuming. But yeah.
Okay, so this is really random, but I didn't know knew so much about fluid dynamics, and I don't know that much about it. But have you heard of a company called Spin Launch?
Not really.
They want to create like a huge centrifuge and fling things into orbit.
Oh yeah. It sounds interesting.
Yeah, but I mean, just think about how fast it has to be at the point of release. So they have like this centrifuge in a vacuum chamber,
right,
that they're spinning up to like, thousands of RPMs, right? And then whenever you get it fast enough to release it, it pierces like this membrane that is what was keeping it at vacuum.
right.
And then now it's suddenly in one atmosphere of
pressure.
Pressure, and it's traveling what, Mach 10, 15, however fast you have to be going in order to still have orbital velocity by the time you got through the atmosphere.
Exit velocity. I feel like there's a lot of issues that would come out of it, just like even the sonic boom, just instantly changing the conditions of like where it's at. So like the package would have to be super sturdy. That feels like a very complicated project.
It does. It does. I mean, it feels like something that'd be good on the moon, perhaps. You already have the vacuum, and you don't have to worry about that interface between vacuum and air. But anyway, just thought I'd see if you had some thoughts on it. But so, did you know that NASA is planning to send astronauts back to the moon again for the first time since 1972?
I've heard about it, yes.
And how did you find out about it?
So through the whole AIAA chapter at U of H, I've been getting a lot of news about some positions at Johnson Space Center. Recently, we got one through the engineering department that was talking about the Artemis project. And they were talking about they needed some people to work on a manned vehicle, I'm pretty sure. And I don't remember what the other position was. And I applied to one of them. I mean, I sent my resume and stuff. So before doing that, in case I got an interview and stuff like that, I did some research on the project. And also, aside from that, there's been a bunch of news about some of the astronauts that have been picked. I think there was the first Mexican woman that was picked for space flight. I don't remember her name exactly, but it's been buzzing around a lot. So I've heard multiple things.
Yeah. Well, what does surprise you that whenever I go up to people at coffee shops and at the mall and on the airplane and do interviews like this, only about 20% of them know that we're actually sending people to the moon?
Uh, yes and no. It surprises me from the point of view of someone that's kind of in the field, or like at least adjacent to a bunch of people that are working on similar projects or that want to work for NASA in the future. But also, my girlfriend is actually not even in STEM, and if I asked her anything about this, she would not know and probably wouldn't care, because a lot of the people just, I guess, kind of forgot about it and don't really have an interest in it. But I think it's pretty cool.
Um, okay, so that brings up kind of like the inverse question.
Hmm.
Uh, are there things that are similar to like going to the moon for you that your girlfriend would know about that you wouldn't?
Yeah. She's a psychology major, and she wants to work with um, abused kids, and she's really passionate about it, and that's one of the things that I really love about her. But she will spend hours just scouring psychology books and reading about that stuff. So she's really knowledgeable, and I don't really have that kind of insight. So whenever she brings it up, I just end up sitting and listening to her talk for like hours.
Um, yeah, I also think about that about like sports and
Mhm.
things that are kind of like in my blind spot, that
Yeah,
like who won the last World Series or World Cup, I guess.
yeah.
I'm have a bit of a cough, so I'm trying to save you the acoustic effects, but I can't do anything about the visuals.
That's fine.
So what do you think about us going back to the moon?
I think it's really, so there's two main reasons why I think it's a really good. Um, the main one kind of is just to understand a lot more about what could happen in other places outside of the Earth. As we kind of get to I'm a really huge like science fiction fan. So as we really get to that point where it's becoming possible that humanity could expand outside of the borders of Earth, just kind of like go other places, but we really don't have any insight on what that could look like. We're kind of just speculating, and like, I mean, we can do the numbers and run calculations and everything, but we don't really have any hands-on like experimental results. So I think going to the moon could be a really good first step, just to run a bunch of experiments of a ton, any kind, just figure out what the behaviors would look like under different conditions firsthand, like actually look at the results. So that's one of the main exciting things. The other one is kind of tied up to the first, but it's just really that the fact that we're getting to that point where we can just go somewhere else and we can really make it a reality where we go not just to the moon, but to Mars next and to other neighboring planets.
Um, so you mentioned you're a science fiction fan. Do you have
Mhm.
some favorite books and authors?
Mm, more than books, I was again raised in Colombia, so we got a lot of the stuff after it already had its spotlight in the US. Um, and I remember being a fan of the prequel trilogy of Star Wars
Hmm.
when I was young, when I was around 5 years old. They were starting to come out in Colombia, and I rewatched them time and time and time again. And it just sounds like a really cool concept that we can just go somewhere else in our galaxy really fast.
Hmm. And you mentioned that you're excited about us going to the moon and Mars and beyond. Some
Hmm.
people are like, why are we sending people off to space and exploring that when we have all these problems here on Earth? What's your
Hmm.
thoughts?
Yeah, so I think we have a bunch of problems on Earth that we should focus on solving first. Climate change is a really big one. I have a lot of my first internship was with the French embassy here in Houston, and we're trying to figure out what the landscape for the energy transition process was looking like in Texas. So climate change was the big one that we were focusing on, a big problem that I believe we should figure out a way to solve before we really pool all of our resources into going somewhere else in the galaxy. But I also think that figuring it out first is very important. So having these missions is a very important aspect of kind of moving towards the future. And then after all like major problems were solved around back home, back here, I think collectively all of humanity should pool our resources and stuff to try and figure out how to go somewhere else.
And Jeff Bezos, when he talks about space and what it means to him, he wants to create the infrastructure to move all those earth harming activities like energy generation, mining, manufacturing, heavy industry off of the earth into space, and kind of make earth maybe zoned for just life and light residential. It seems like that's that vision, at least, rather not how realistic it is and what it would take to get there, would be in line with kind of addressing climate change issues. As wonder what you thought about that.
Yeah, but as you just mentioned, it's concerning that usually the people that have those kinds of ideas, so like Bezos or like Musk sometimes has some ideas like that. It's usually people that don't really know what it would entail to actually put in the manpower and the hours and everything to figure out how that could even be feasible. Like how would you produce all of that energy offsite and then bring it back to Earth, right? Like we can't even figure out yet how to keep all the energy that we could produce with renewables to use at a later date. So like how would we figure that out to bring back from Mars or something? I think a lot of it sounds nice, but yeah, just from the point of view of how realistic it is, I think it's centuries off. It would be a nice thing to work towards, but as of now, I feel like we should really just figure out how to make it sustainable back home.
Just talking about energy production, the sun produces a lot of energy in all directions, but only a little small part of it actually falls on Earth. And if you were to create a sphere that had the same diameter as the Earth's orbit, and you looked at the surface area of that sphere, that would represent like the total energy output of the sun. And then if you looked at the cross-section area of the Earth, that would represent how much actually falls on the Earth. And I think the proportion of that too is it's like something like 1 to 700 billion, or something like that. So, I mean, it's like, and that little bitty small part of the sun's energy powers all weather, all life, every bit of oil that's been produced, everything. It seems like the sun produces, by comparison, almost infinite amount of energy compared to what we use.
Yeah.
So, I mean, is there some way to, do some of our data processing and solar-powered satellites that are orbiting the sun? Potentially you could capture more of that or something.
Yeah, the whole issue is the transport of energy. I was looking into doing my I'm actually looking at how to apply to grad school as soon as my bachelor's is over. And I was really interested in a lot of professors doing research in power density and materials to make batteries better, so we can actually harness energy from more remote areas and move it somewhere. Well, like keeping it. So yeah, that's definitely like if you look at it, it's kind of obvious that that's an infinite source of energy. We should like harness its power and figure out how to use it. But it poses so many challenges that it's definitely a couple hundred years away from like what we can do right now. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't start looking into it. Because
I'm just thinking a couple hundred years, just 100 years ago, we didn't have the transistor. There was no commercial aviation. There was no rockets. The first satellite hadn't even been created. The first computer, the digital computer at least hadn't been created. It's just like,
yeah, it definitely seems like humanity's growth curve is exponential. So like we started very slow, and then kind of like as we got further, the curve is steeper and we just grow faster. So it's very exciting to think about what we would be able to do in 100, 200 years.
Oh, you have the exponential, you have linear, and you have exponential, but there's also
Mhm.
another one, the logistics curve,
Mhm.
where it grows a very little bit, and then you have like the peak, and then it grows again very little.
Yeah.
Sometimes I feel like we're right on the transition between the high growth and the
Or it's going to be
low
very
growth.
little.
Yeah.
Let's hope not. Let's hope we just kind of keep going at a healthy rate.
See, I think the big thing for me is, I like, if you look at like the Roman Empire and the Greek empires and like all these things, you know, their technology changed very, very slowly.
Mhm.
And then it's just like, I mean, like you could take a Roman soldier at the end of the Roman Empire and put him 1,000 years earlier at the beginning, and he
Mhm.
could still get along just fine.
Right.
But you know, if you did the same thing with people in today's technology, and we took somebody now and, you know, put them here like 50 years ago, they would have trouble coping without
Yeah.
the technology, and then vice versa. So I guess, you know, what actually creates that ability to innovate and change, and is that ability actually increasing or diminishing? You know, it's like, I don't know.
Yeah. That's a very good question, because I feel like nowadays we just have a bunch of tools and just access to more information than ever. So when I'm doing some part of my research, I can just go on the computer and look up some of the papers that other people have already published on the issue. I feel like you couldn't have done that 20, 30 years ago. You would have had to go to the, like take a trip to the library, try and see if they have the books that you were supposed to be using for this. Now you can just type it into Google Scholar and you get the information back. We also have better tools. We have 3D printers. We have all kinds of crazy stuff that we can use to test our theories. So I feel like we're in a really good spot for really understanding the world around us. And just trial and error is really easy. It's not resource intensive. You can just make a bunch of prototypes, see which one works. You have access to much more things. So I feel like at this point, we're at a really good spot to just test our luck.
I feel like though that having access to so much information means that, you know, everything becomes a sort of library science, you know, like how to
Mhm.
ask the right question as opposed to how to figure things out.
Yeah.
So that kind of worries me. But where do you see humanity in 200 years? Just based upon what you see.
I feel like, so there could be two outcomes. One where it just kind of keeps the same and it just keeps getting slowly a little bit worse. We don't solve a climate change. We don't solve a bunch of problems that humanity is facing right now. But the other outcome could be we just really put our effort towards solving the major problems. Doing this study on the energy transition process in Texas, we found that Texas is kind of leading the charge in the energy transition process, at least in a production kind of sense. We're the state that produces the most clean energy in the union. So there's a couple of policy decisions and like really just changing people's minds that could make it so much better. We could sink so much more funding into energy research. We could change what the laws look like, everything. So it really depends on where people want to go, if that's a good way to put it. So if we really try, we could be in a very good spot in 200 years where we can take recreational trips to Mars to visit family or something like that. We could be running all of our dangerous research offsite on the moon or something like that, as to not jeopardize the security of people down here.
Yeah, but you know, I think a lot of people don't make decisions based upon sort of like these abstract concepts of what's better for the environment and everything. They're like
Yeah.
very, you know, what's going to happen to my job, what's going to happen to my retirement account, you know, what's going to happen to, you know, the value of my gasoline using car, you know, that type of
Mm-hmm.
thing. So
Yeah, but I feel like that's a normal aspect of life, though. Not everyone has the luxury of thinking of the good of humanity as a whole before thinking of what they're gonna have for dinner that night, you know? So I feel like it's in the hands of the people that can think like that to try to make the world a better place and like give the ideas, give the solutions, give everything out so as to people actually pick them up.
yeah, it's interesting how these things sort of work out. But so if you could, would you take a trip to space?
Yeah.
How far would you go? Just to orbit, to moon? Would you immigrate to Mars?
Uh yeah, I would. So the reason why my answer is kind of just yeah, sure, is because I would do it just out of curiosity, just kind of like to see what it's like, to see what we can do, to really like experience it, right? Um, but I don't really have that much of an like a specific goal in mind, you know, like I wouldn't think of oh yeah, I'm going to Mars to do this thing. I would just like to see that we can't do it, that we've gotten to the point where we can just go there.
Yeah, and I think that point's going to come quicker than anybody can realize. I
Yeah.
don't know if you've been following what SpaceX has been doing with the Starship,
Hmm.
with having completely reusable spacecraft that's able to carry 100 tons to orbit,
Yeah.
um, and it's like going to, I think, revolutionize our concept of space travel.
Yeah, it'll be way less resource intensive than having to rebuild a new rocket every time you're going to do it. So yeah, I just don't know how quick, faster than anybody realizes could be, because human lives are very finite. So I would really love to see it in my lifespan, but I'm already what 23 years old, so I don't know if in this span of 60 years we would be going there.
I think before you turn 30, there'll be people on Mars.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a
and
very
I bet you before you turn 40, there will be people living permanently on Mars.
that's a very exciting thought. Oh yeah, I wish I could go there before my life is over. But I guess we just have to work hard to make it a reality, right?
Yeah, I think what we have to do is make people believe it could be a reality, and then it
Hmm.
would materialize. I think our biggest barrier is disbelief.
Yeah. How so?
I mean, if you don't believe it's possible, you don't make the investments to make it happen, and then you look at the results, and that reconfirms that you think it's impossible. And
Hmm.
it's like it becomes like this barrier, you know.
Yeah.
But the moment you show that it's possible, then you have everything operating in the opposite direction.
Yeah. It just becomes more of everybody just gets on board
Yeah,
if the results, yeah, if the results prove it. Yeah, I
I mean
would love to be
it's
sorry.
like Tesla. I mean, people are like, oh, you can't have electric cars. There's no place to charge them.
Hmm.
They're slow. They're bad performing. And then they go build the Tesla supercharging network, and then
Hmm.
you have like Teslas that go like to 0 to 50 in like 2 seconds or something crazy like that. And then suddenly, you've dispelled all those myths, and now everybody's creating electric cars.
Yeah, it's always amazing. Or like with hydrogen, how everybody was discounting it, and we knew what it could do, but it was just yeah, it's never gonna amount to anything. And then people started actually doing research on it, and I'm aware JSC was looking into some avenues of securing some hydrogen power. So like, it's crazy how quick you can change people's minds once you realize that something will work.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, the shuttle and Apollo, I mean, they all used but hydrogen and oxygen to make electricity.
Hmm.
Um, so
It's
it's
crazy how long some technologies have been around, but you just kind of don't pay attention to them until one day you do. They just get thrusted into the spotlight, and you really just like start investing a bunch of research into them.
yeah, for sure. Well, let's say you are one of your descendants actually immigrates to Mars, and
Hmm.
it's 200 years in the future, and it's your great, 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 great granddaughter, or however many grades it takes. And she's in high school doing a history project on the 2020s. So she's 200 years in the future on Mars, never been to Earth. And, she's having to research about what it was like on Earth in the 2020s. What do you hope she can put in her paper about this decade?
Me.
Excellent.
Yeah, I would really love to leave at least, not be world famous or anything like that, but I would really love to at least leave something that people in the future can remember. And like, even if it's a small group of academics or like people doing some research on a specific topic, but then they'll revisit my work and say, oh, so this is where this came from. This is what helped us understand this part of our process. It would be, I would consider myself to have had a good life if I get to that point.
I think that's a wonderful answer, because I would hope that we're all like living our life big enough that we hope to actually be doing something worthwhile that to be remembered in 200 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope you achieve your vision.
I hope so too. Working really hard for it right now.
Well, Nicolas, thank you so much for helping my project. Before I stop the recording, is there anything else that you wanted to add?
Yeah. I mean, just kind of like a general statement that I feel like all of us should do the most that we can to be the best that we want to do. To leave something for the future, for people to look back and think, wow, that's incredible.
I couldn't agree with you more. Well, let me go ahead and stop the recording then.
Okay.